Hello, Woody, Forrest, Woody Mosten.
Hi, Carl Michael.
Thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with me. We could chat a little bit about collaborative practice and share your thoughts with a much broader audience through the World of Collaborative Practice magazine. So why don't we just dive right in? Is that all right?
My pleasure.
Okay. I thought we would take as a launching start some of your ideas on the visions of the future of collaborative practice. And I start right from a fascinating notion for me, the one of the clients calling out and actually seeking this out, demanding from their professionals, this is what I want to do. Can you talk a little bit more about that first, how you see that playing out?
Well, to start there is along the road. Can I go back? Can
Certainly.
I go back to the conceptual framework of how I see law and mediation as consumer service products that people will seek and will meet their needs? Because I think I'd like to, if I go back a bit, it may put collaborative practice into context. We talk a lot about old paradigm, and I won't go into all of the wonderful conceptual work that has paved the way for collaborative practice in a transition from an old paradigm to a new paradigm. But I'd like to take a piece of that, and that is that, and I must say that collaborative practice hasn't quite gotten there totally yet, and that is it is a client-centered process, not a professionally driven process, and that the client is at least co-captain, if not the chief captain of her or his service delivery. And I have many beloved colleagues who don't take collaborative colleagues who don't take that view. And their view is that the collaborative professionals are essentially like flight pilots, and that the clients are essentially like the passengers. They buy a ticket, but they don't fly the plane. And I don't find that analogy particularly helpful, because in particularly divorce work, but I think in any personal service delivery, there has been too long a view that it is a professionally driven elite and prerogative to determine the level of service and what services are needed, as opposed to the clients. It's clear that clients every one of us believes should make ultimate decisions when it comes to settling a case or what they want in form of a solution, but that the process, much like a surgeon is going to decide which instruments to use, not the patient. Many believe it's the professionals. And I happen to have a slightly different view. That view comes from my work in unbundling. It comes from my work in mediation. And it is part of my work in collaborative, where I think even as to process, that process determines results, process determines decisions, and that we as professionals need to to offer a humble, a curious, yet a professional approach to clients. And that professional approach means providing them necessary information, but truly delegating to them the right to make the decisions. We have the right not to provide the service if we believe the decisions will be harmful. But ultimately, it's a respect, and you may even call it a love, of the consumer and of clients to make their own decisions, even if those decisions are self-destructive, harmful, and unwise.
You've really touched in a lot of areas that I'm kind of quivering inside. I want to address so much of what you've said. I think I'll start with the word you use is delivery of professional services. And my thinking has been that it's around that notion that things have gotten, that the debate you're describing over what is the extent to which the professionals decide, what the services look like versus the clients decide saying, I want this, that, and the other thing. And the way I've started to think of that is rather than in terms of the term services, which when you talk about a doctor, very few clients are going to have any interest in saying, I want to tell you how you're going to carve me up. They want to go to a professional and say, you know how to do this, you fix it. Where legal and mental health and financial services, especially as they are combined into collaborative practice, is not necessarily that type of service. Change my oil in the car, fix my leaky heart valve. It's a softer service. And the word that I've begun to use, especially when I'm talking to prospective clients, is around the notion of support. That they are going through a decision-making process, especially when we're talking about divorce. But even when we're talking about other civil disagreements, it always comes down to a decision-making process. And the question to be addressed is how much and what kind of support does the client need in order to interact with this other person and reach those decisions? Is that kind of the notion you're talking about?
It is, and I think I would affirm everything that you said just there. I'd like to go back though to something that you said, and I don't want it to parse it too closely, and that is whether we differ in kind as well as degree from a more technical kind of service. Because many of our colleagues believe we have that kind of technical service. We know statutes, we know how to draft, we have experience with negotiation theory and many, many aspects of knowledge. And that knowledge to many of our colleagues, even our collaborative colleagues, provides, unfortunately, a superiority because they know more, therefore their views are to be given much more weight than that of the client. And I think that in the medical profession, and I speak both as a practitioner scholar, but also as a patient, I believe the medical field is not only ahead of us, but they understand that in those technical areas, maybe especially in those technical areas, informed consent and client-centered decision-making is so important. So I really believe that is an important aspect. By the way, my FedEx person just came. Come on in, please.
The rendering of services in action.
Yes. Well, that's what happens when you're in a commercial office.
No, that's
and
fine.
I'll have to sign in a moment. But since I'm the client of FedEx, they came into my office very nicely, and I'm going to sign.
We have more out there, but it's just supplies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. And so, going through my sister's care, she had melanoma. I didn't say malignant because it's always malignant, which is very, very serious, and she's doing well now. I watched her doctors be educators in many ways far beyond what I've seen among our colleagues in the collaborative field, and I think we're at the very high end of at least lawyers and maybe mental health professionals and financial professionals in client service. So I guess my point is I really do want to talk about how we can do it better, and I think it's really important for us to know how much further we have to go.
So there is, as I hear you talking about, an evolution that's necessary collectively in the professionals in their thinking about what it is I have to offer, and how involved the client is in determining what part of what I have suits them and how even that is delivered to them.
I think that is elegantly stated. That's the essence, Carl Michael, of the whole unbundling concept, which we can talk more specifically about later. But it goes beyond that. For example, out the door of my office, right next door to me, sharing a wall, is a client library. I consider a professional office to be a classroom of client education. That's what we do. We work with them, and I thought your idea of support is a very, very apt one. But we help provide the support, and some of it's with our words, and some of it is with our computer programs, and some of it is our libraries, and some of it is referral to other professionals. There's a lot of things that we do that gives them much more on their palette to be able to paint a picture for their solutions that's rich and full and is determined by them. It's a very exciting concept.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's a piece of what appeals to me, and what I believe at their core appeals to, by and large, most, if not all, of our collaborative colleagues, is the involvement of the clients. That doesn't mean they're comfortable with it. That doesn't mean they're always at ease with surrendering any part of their professionalism, what they perceive as their professionalism, to the client. Law certainly, especially in terms of litigation, has a very paternalistic air about it. I know how it's done. I know what needs to be done, and don't worry, I know what's best for you. There's an awful lot of that in practicing law.
Well, and there's a lot of it. I'm sorry. You're not finished.
No, that's okay. Go.
I think there's a lot of it within our field, within our collaborative field, with people I very much respect and love. Let me give you an example so I can start to be controversial right from the start.
There we go.
I believe that just like a client, a consumer, can pick the kind of process that she or he wants, I also believe the consumer should pick the professional and the professional team. And it is absolutely permissible for us to work with the people we are most comfortable with and to present an interdisciplinary full team of people that we've worked with before and we know we can count on in the future. And it's up to the client to decide, do they want that set team, or do they want, in a sense, to cherry pick or to pick different members of that team. It's also our right to say, I won't work with you that way. And I respect those colleagues of ours who say, look, I will only work in a set team because I think that's the best professional work I can provide. And if you don't like it, you can go somewhere else. But the key is to disclose that there is something else, that there are other options, and that there are other options maybe down the hall or down the street or in a few miles away. Right. And that goes right next to the feeling of, I want more cases. Yeah. But I happen to believe, and I've really experienced it, you get more cases when you let go and you inform and let people to make those kinds of decisions.
The way you described the importance of saying, this is how I operate, and there is another way to do it, but I don't do that. That certainly comes home to me in terms of when I'm doing an initial interview, I of course share information about all the approaches, mediation, collaborative, and litigation, and I describe the processes, the approaches, and I make it plain to them that I just don't do litigation. I will not take on a litigated case at all. And what I hear you, pardon?
I'm sorry.
So that's certainly a less controversial approach. And what I hear you saying is, if a practitioner feels that way about a particular way of delivering support, even within collaborative practice, it's important for that professional to come to his or her own self-awareness, but not explain it to the client necessarily as this is the way it's supposed to be done.
I think that's headed there. I would frame it a little different way. First of all, that it's the client who is the focus of the conversation. My comfort is secondary to, and my profitability is secondary to the client's choice. That, it really, this is a high-class problem, Carl Michael. It's a high-class problem because not too many years ago, if somebody wanted collaborative, they were just happy to find any collaborative practitioner. And whatever model, and by the way, I don't think they were always reflective models, but whatever model of collaborative that practitioner used, that's what they got. Mm-hmm. And with the proliferation of good literature and trainings and IACP growing and listservs moderated by brilliant facilitators, those types of things, we're getting a much more sophisticated professional cadre, and we're getting a more sophisticated consumer cadre. People are coming to me now and they're saying, well, what kind of team do you work with? How do you deal with termination? What happens? I heard this thing about you sometimes will make a collaborative proposal. How will that come into how does that come in with confidentiality? I'm so impressed with these consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a long way to go, but I'm finding that that's the kind of people I want to work with.
Yeah.
And if after paying me for my consultation, they choose to work with a different practitioner who has a different model or a different approach toward the practice, that is good for the field. May not be good for me on that particular situation. Although on the other hand, may be good because it doesn't, as we know, work well for us as professionals to try to deliver where there's a disconnect of expectations and rhythm and interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it doesn't feel right working with the client, it will not work well with the client, for either the professional or the client. I have always believed it's very important to get that up front, and that's, one of the things, another component, I don't want to lead us onto a sidetrack, but certainly another component of what we're talking about is the age-old expectation that as a professional, you do not self-reveal. You don't share who you are as a person with the client. And thankfully, I think that's changed an awful lot. Or maybe I'm just so surrounded by collaborative practice where it seems to be not so, it seems to be not so much of an expectation. But that notion of how you work with the people is so important to the success in a case. One of the things that just popped in my head, going back to something you said earlier, yes, it's important that a professional know other professionals with whom they don't necessarily get along. And at the same time, simply deciding I'm never going to do another case with that professional robs me of the opportunity to figure out, well, what's going on here? To grow, to work with someone.
I would.
Go ahead.
I'm going to refocus that one also.
Okay.
It robs your client of the chance to have you help them, and because the other party has chosen that person that you've had some challenges with.
Yes.
So again, I'm going to focus it on the client. I call it the informed consent consumer satisfaction litmus test, impact test. And everything around what we do, we go, is this working for the client? So if I'm uncomfortable with another professional, I want to know how that impacts on the client. And I want to be able to explore, at least with myself, because there's a whole other area of boundaries which I believe limits transparency. In the sense that, I'll give you an example from the most impeccable source. I was watching The Good Wife last night, which, by the way, takes place in Chicago, so you must love it. And the firm that Alicia, the star, is an associate in, was being sued for malpractice, and was being sued for malpractice by her client and her now reconciled husband, blaming the law firm for basically encouraging the divorce and alienating the affections of both of them. It was quite interesting. So the issue came around on this important and impeccable source. Alicia had been having trouble with her own marriage. And in a deposition, the malpractice attorney was asking her, didn't you tell your client how good it felt finally to get a cheating husband out of the house. And didn't that encourage her to leave her husband? And Alicia looked stricken and gave an answer like, well, I was comforting her by sharing some of my information. Well, what we tell clients in the guise of transparency, in my view, has to be assessed by how will it help the client. So that in the old paradigm, which we all criticize roundly, telling war stories is a big part of that paradigm. Whether they be litigators, solicitors, or barristers, war stories are something that traditionally, that's what lawyers do. They tell war stories about their successes. When we know from research in client counseling, it's far more effective to stay with what the client is doing and never mention a war story. Clients will act impressed and they'll listen, because also they don't want to offend egos. They don't want to offend us, if we're over the line a little bit, because they don't want to lose us because we're highly referred and we're particularly skilled. On the other hand, it doesn't do anything for the decision-making process to hear how wonderful we were in other cases. Yet I see collaborative professionals tell our own war stories in front of clients all the time. Mm-hmm. I have been in cases where where one of my colleagues will mention, oh, at IACP, didn't we like so-and-so? Or I had a case with this other person, boy, it's so much better being with you. I mean, these are war stories. These are vestiges of old paradigm.
Told in front of the client?
In front of the client.
Okay. In
front of the client. Because there's a view by these professionals that by sharing this, they'll somehow feel how collegial we are. Clients don't care. They want, a little like, and I don't want this taken the wrong way, but I'm on the internet now. It could be quoted. In many ways, children are narcissistic in the sense they want their needs met. And how their parents feel is not really generally something that a 3, 4, 5, 8, 10-year-old is going to be very concerned about. Well, clients, I think, have the right to have that form of narcissism in their care. They have the right to have professionals who park their own sense of narcissism in favor of a client stroking the client narcissism. And these are really interesting and elusive concepts, but I think we need to be talking about them.
There's a thought that came to my mind. Certainly, there's nothing much I can. On the one hand, what I hear you saying is, in the midst of a 4-way or a 6-way with clients and 2 professionals, is not the time for the 2 professionals to be chatting each other up about their own personal lives. The sense of transparency and humanity that self-revelation can bring doesn't seem to be served by that, because it distracts from the client's needs. I can imagine one of the clients saying, hey, I'm not paying for you two to talk to each other about a conference you were at together. Let's get to our case. And also, while you were talking, especially when you said war stories, there's an awful large part in my observation and past experience in litigation is around the sharing with clients of war stories. And I have seen some of that in collaborative cases and, wonder what you might think about that. And by that, what I'm saying is, everything from, let me tell you how terrible, things can get in a litigated case, all the way to, would you like to know what a judge might do in a circumstance like yours? I consider them both war stories. Some thoughts you may have on those?
Actually, yes. It's come up personally. I made a choice in my last book, a collaborative divorce handbook, not to tell war stories, not to mention some high-profile cases, even if I have the client's permission. And I've had colleagues who said, well, why didn't you? It was a great opportunity to link the readers with the sense that if high-profile people are using your services, why not mention them? And I have mentioned them in the past, so I'm certainly not totally consistent and perfect on it. On the other hand, I think it's important that we really focus on the person in front of us. It's why when I go see a professional, I'm so relieved when their desk is clean, that the file on it is my file, as opposed to having to fish my file out from other people's files. It's little things like that. And it's something that I'm always working on myself, because none of us are free from ego and the desire to be stroked. At the same time, I'm pretty convinced from my work in client consultations that it isn't an effective and efficient use of our professional time. There's a wonderful, wonderful book that was really hot about 10 or 15 years ago in the mediation field by Donald Schoen, S-C-H-O-E-N, the reflective practitioner. Are you familiar with it, Carl Michael?
Not off the top of my head, no.
He was an MIT professor who really wrote about professionalism, and mediation and collaborative professionals aren't a part of it. Lawyers are, traditional lawyers, architects, business people, therapists. And I happen to be an aficionado of Donald Schoen, and he lives much closer to our lives with Michael Lang and Allison Taylor's book, The Making of a Mediator, where if you take the word mediator and you replace throughout and put collaborative professional, it is a manifesto for us. Michael Lang is truly a treasure. And he has taken Schoen's work and adapted it to mediation. And in my book, I've done it I've adapted it to collaborative, but it's really the real hard work came from Michael.
Okay. The self-promotional nature of telling war stories.
I can barely hear you now, Michael.
Pardon?
Oh, Michael.
Pardon?
I can barely hear you right now.
Oh, okay. Beyond the self-promotional nature of telling war stories, this is what I accomplished. One of the active questions in collaborative practice is the involvement, to what extent do we involve the law? And that was the other element of the war stories that I was talking about. Tell me, would you like me to tell you what a judge might do in a case like yours. And I have some thoughts on the value and role that can play, especially in a collaborative case. I'd like to hear if you have any.
I think we may have apples and oranges a bit here.
Okay.
In the sense that I consider the law to be one of those resources to help clients make good decisions. And then there's the issue, does that come from the client's request, or does it come from an offer by the professional? And, I could see both ways on that. Let me not answer the question by going off track and then circling back, if I might.
Sure.
There is a book by David Binder, Susan Price, and Paul Bergman called Lawyer as Counselor. It's the seminal book in clinical education on client-lawyer interaction. Anyone looking at this video should run to buy it, not walk. And it's a client-centered approach. And Professor Binder raises the issue. If your client says, Carl-Michael, you're experienced, you're wise, I'd like you to make this decision. What would you do? You'd think that Professor Binder's answer would be, oh no, this is your problem, I can't do that. It isn't. He says it's really client-centered to test that a bit, and then to say, okay, if you understand that I'm not you, we differ in many ways, but I'll offer it because you want it. That is client-centered. It's not always intuitive. So when we go talk about the law, it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I do it. Explain not just how judges will handle things, although I'm less likely to do that since I haven't been in a courtroom now in 14 years. But it is very likely for me to talk about how the law will treat something and give a range and maybe even a majority view and maybe even my view as to how I think it would work out. I think I always start with using the law as one of many of the variables, because I think the client's personality and emotional framework and mental capacity, the relationships that she or he is in, the financial considerations, the impact on institutions like the family or the businesses are, as in Leonard Riskinian terms, broader concepts than just the law, and they're important, but the law is not unimportant. And I charge enough money in my practice so that when a client says to me, in how long will I have to pay spousal support, or how long can I get spousal support, I should answer that question and not just throw another question back. And by the way, if my style is not to do that, that client should know that before they pay money for a consultation or services. I'll give you an example. I know of collaborative practitioners who won't sign off on a document, approved as, or certify that the client's been informed. Well, I think they have every right not to sign off as a policy. But tell the client first before they go in. So if they're expecting a lawyer sign-off, or the other side is expecting a lawyer sign-off, I think we should talk about our protocol. I never sign off, or I'll sign off if in fact if I am convinced you understand it. These are nuances that are to me the essence of good professional work, not just lawyering, but other ways as well. By the way, we've been going a while. I'd love to carve out another hour, another time, if we could.
That'd be great.
And maybe do a series of these.
I'd love that. Do you want to call it a pause at this point?
That would be great.
Okay.
Only because...
Because I've got about a half dozen more questions that I want to pose to you, and I'd love to continue.
You want to start our next time? In fact, if anyone in Internet land is looking at this, maybe they could pose questions too. Send them to you, with or without attribution, and we will have a real conversation. I don't consider this to have any particular end. We can go on as long as people want to see it, and you have room on your server to load it up.
That would be great. That's exactly what Gloria and I have in mind for the magazine, because once we post this, people will be able to post comments and raise questions, just as if it's a blog. So they'll be able to watch it and type in their comments. So let's wrap this up. Again, thank you, and we'll close this recording. I just want to wrap it back around to where you started. The notion that we're there to serve the client, and the importance that the client be well informed, and that too is part of what we're trying to accomplish with the magazine, because it's accessible to anybody to read it, to watch your video. It's not limited to professionals. I want it to be available for prospective clients to come and listen to what you have to say about this, so that they can pose their own questions in their own time without the pressure of sitting in an attorney's office, and just relax with it and think about the decisions they have to make. So thank you for being willing to be a part of this.
It's absolutely an honor. I'm looking forward to the next chapter.
Okay. Well, I will close this recording, and then you and I will talk about this.
Good.